Welcome to episode 2 of the Inside Line podcast presented by Thor. I'm Michael Lindsay. I'll be this week's host, and our guest is Derek Dornstein. He is the Chief Technical Officer and co-founder of Alta Motors. Born and raised in California, into speedway, flat track world, eventually into supermoto, and that's about the time him and a friend set out on what is now Alta Motors. It started as a weekends and nights project to produce an electric dirt bike, and it grew probably to a little bit larger range than they thought, and eventually became a company with around 100 employees. During this, I think you'll learn what I found out in San Francisco at their HQ this last week, learning a lot about the development, the hows, the whys behind the bike, the struggles, and even more, the motivation of what originally set this in motion. And I think that motivation alone and the reasoning may change a few people's minds that are a little bit anti for electric dirt bikes. At least by the time you're done listening to this podcast, I would hope those type of people have a different view and respect for what these guys are trying to do, and maybe even want to go out and see what the product's about and try one for yourself. Before we really dive into it, I want to apologize ahead of time for the audio. We did this in very tight confines between a board meeting and a technical meeting Derek had to rush to. So we've got a little bit of echo reverb off the voices because we're in kind of a tight, small room. Definitely not something to expect from this podcast going forward. And speaking of the podcast itself, we'd like to thank the people that have made this happen. As we mentioned at the top of the show, the Inside Line podcast is presented by Thor. Thor is celebrating 50 years of racing heritage. The first, the forever Thor Motocross. For more than 30 years, Chaparral Motorsports has been sharing its love of dirt bikes with like-minded individuals by offering a massive selection of the latest riding gear, new models, parts and accessories, and great pricing on tires. Visit shapmoto.com. So let's dive on into it so you can all learn what there is to know about Alta, the birth, and where this company is going. Derek, thanks for the time. I know you're fairly busy. We're up here actually for one of your guys' intros. We just spent the last 2 days riding the Redshift EXR, your guys' basically dual sport model, and we're getting to look around. And I gotta admit, I was kind of surprised. I guess, a couple years back, looking at what the brand is, I think people can get a little bit of a misconception of what you guys are here. Alta, we're up here in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's an electric bike. People might think it's a bunch of nerds that may not know much about dirt bikes and they're just building something electric and green. But I mean, until you come here and really grasp your head around it, it's a bunch of, even though you guys are on electric bikes, it's a bunch of fuel burning moto heads that really do love what they're doing. It was cool to be around here, but kind of backtracking from that, we'll get to this building and what we're all in, starting with how you got involved with moto, because it's basically you and 2 dudes that started this. Where was your passion grown for? I pretty much know you were a speedway guy.
Yeah, no, I got put on a bike at 4. It's the family activity, right? All my folks, their friends it's all motorcycles. All family vacations were motorcycles, and they didn't actually want me to race as a kid. I had to get a job and buy my own race bike, and once I did that, they were all for it, and so I got my pro license at 16 and hit the speedway trail around mostly around California. Did that for 5 years, and had a lot of fun doing it. I did some off-road things here and there, raced a little motocross here and there, and just basically love motorcycles. I've owned somewhere around 50 motorcycles in my life, and old ones, new ones, fast ones, fewer slow ones, but mostly focused on performance things and race bikes and racing. Came into supermoto racing in my 30s. Got pretty obsessed with that, and I got obsessed with both riding and bike development, and developed KTM 450 up to a pretty high level. I finished top Pro-Am KTM in the nation in 2005. Had a lot of fun doing that, and that led to the idea of building an electric bike.
So that's what I think is interesting is being, of course, from the moto style industry, I see it, the motocross bike, but really when you look at the first bike you guys introduced before it was Alta, it was BRD, it was really based off your love and your excitement in racing with supermoto, yeah. And that's really what drove the development. So kind of stopping before we even get to that point is, where does your background come from to, anybody, of course, at some point or another sitting in their garage with some buddies like, Oh, I can make one. I can make a motorcycle, but where'd the know-how for you come from to basically actually be able to develop something?
Yeah, I've had an interesting career as a product developer. I studied industrial design at San Francisco State University, but didn't take the traditional path, which would have been to go to a design office and work as a designer at a corporation or a design house. I've always been somewhat entrepreneurial, and so I basically opened a machine shop and was designing and building things for all manner of companies and industries. A bunch of high-tech Silicon Valley stuff, some motorcycle stuff, and and then a bunch of design and product-related things. And that grew to a small company, 12 employees, 6 CNC machine tools, and doing some interesting work, and really heavily into the development, prototyping, and building process.
So at what point did it hit you? Like, I think I remember your comment, the Supermoto really had to do with you building up your race bike and still not being happy with like the power characteristics or so.
Yeah,
what point did it hit you like electric?
Yeah, there is a story about me working with my good buddy who is actually now an Alta employee, Dale Lineweaver, who's a pretty famous engine tuner within flat track community. He's also done a bunch of off-road stuff, and we developed this KTM 450, increased its power by 15-20%. Did a bunch of chassis work. Got the bike really at a top level, but it also you extract more horsepower out of a 4-stroke or really any internal combustion engine. You typically narrow the power band because you're pushing the higher RPMs to make more power. That's exactly what happened with this bike. And it really took some fun out of riding it, right? It became a little harder to ride, a little more sensitive to be in the exact right RPM range, and that was this sort of epiphany moment, because simultaneously to doing that, I've been reading what at that time was called the Tesla blog, and the founder of Tesla, this guy Martin Eberhard, was basically, they hadn't really built anything yet, but he was writing this blog and talking about the time for electric vehicles is now and from now into the future, because lithium-ion battery technology had arrived, and I was getting on board with all that and thinking about motorcycles that would be electric in the future, and then the epiphany moment was, gee, if my motorcycle was electric, and I didn't like the way it made power, I could hit undo, right? I could change the software, and I could refine it, and that really represented this sort of magic property, this this superpower that electric would have, that you could just tune it really with impunity, right? There's no consequences. It's easy. Do you have enough test hours? Can you just go out there and make all those refinements at the track? And that got me really excited about it, and it also got me really excited about making an electric race bike as opposed to a scooter for mass market transportation. And so Jeff, one of the 3 co-founders, Jeff and I, who had a long relationship doing product development stuff together. Jeff's got a really cool background. Invented the modern skateboard truck, which became independent. Did snowboard binding, which was Switch snowboard bindings, purchased by Vans. Action sports kind of hero, product developer, designer, and we just said, hey, let's just kind of design something. We didn't commit to founding a company and becoming motorcycle manufacturers, but we committed to let's play around with it, and this turned into a nights and weekends project for us that consumed a lot of time because we were so excited about it.
Now, the actual getting started, is it one of those things that it was long conversations, like you guys picking each other's brain and it finally became that, or is it kind of one of those armchairs sitting in the garage one night just like,
we can do this. We can do.
We weren't that arrogant about it. We're pretty serious product developers. So, we immediately broke it down, and we broke it down into, what this needed to be successful, and in the first thing you really do is you define what is success, right? And what is your targets, and for us, from the original thought bubble, the target was not to build an electric motorcycle, but to build a better motorcycle, right? And so we'd only do this if electric could deliver, better performance than the gas bike. I mean, that was the criteria. And so, we should have just sort of washed out and failed, right? Because really no technologist at the time thought it would really be possible to do that. But, we instead sharpened our pencils and really, focused on what was missing to make that possible. And it turns out that everything was missing. We couldn't really buy any of the parts of this to make it work. We started out by buying at the time, an old CR125, and taking it apart and modeling up the chassis and figuring out if we're going to put a drivetrain in that. We thought we could just buy some parts, some motors and batteries, and just put it together in an inverter. Turns out that all of the commercially available things, they're really designed to be universal, so they could fit lots of different applications. So that there's some big markets for these aftermarket motors and inverters and whatnot, and which means they're completely non-optimized for something like a motocross bike, and they're not really pushed very hard because they're not necessarily the most innovative designs. And so we figured out quickly that we had to not only design our own battery pack and our own battery technology, but we had to design our own motor, and we had to eventually we discovered we had to design our own inverter, and that's really the whole vertical stack of a EV drivetrain. And to put this in perspective, I think that GM spent several $1 billion developing the EV drivetrain in the Bolt, right? So these are large, typically very large industrial endeavors to do these kinds of things.
What did, from the most basic standpoint, like you said, originally starting with like the CR125, did you guys ever, just to see how things react, did you guys ever build like a running thing that just basically looked like batteries shoved in a dirt bike frame, or did you guys get just into piece together and you're like, no, we got to move on?
No, I mean we got that chassis into CAD, right? So we scanned it, we modeled it, we did some sort of mock-ups within that frame with some chunks of foam and whatnot, and we quickly decided that in order to fit really the battery capacity that my simulations estimated that we needed to run a motocross race, we needed a lot more battery than would fit into a chassis built that way. That we needed a different chassis configuration, and so that got us going down this path of really building the whole thing from scratch for ourselves. And it was an interesting moment in this because the project went from, this will be a fun like nights and weekends project, to wow, we're developing or we're potentially going to develop all this technology, and huge investments, and with an unknown timeline. And so right around then, we also threw together a really rough draft of a business plan around this, and started thinking about what it would take to actually do this as a business. Because we figured out that it was, the simulations were pointing to it being possible technologically, and so the next hurdle was it possible financially? And so we threw together a business plan, and we decided we needed to have a third founder who was responsible for the business side, fundraising, building all the sort of company infrastructure. So we attracted Mark Finnigstein, the third co-founder, and he came on initially he was very skeptical of what we were claiming, looked at all the simulations in the CAD, got really excited about it. He started doing this nights and weekends too, and after another 8 or 9 months of nights and weekends with him. He put together a much more detailed business plan. Our mechanical design, our electrical design was coming together. We founded Alta in 2010, really then attracted initial seed investment, added a couple more team members, and really went down this path of developing the bike.
That was literally, and you almost answered my question in this back. I was thinking as you're talking about is, man, when you go from garage build to, oh, we have to make everything, it's like, why are we doing this unless it's got to at some point pay off or be a business, or so you're putting all this time and effort into it.
Well, I mean, that part of it is just built into really all three founders' mindsets, right? I mean, we're all very entrepreneurial and very very interested in these inflection points in society, right? I mean, electrification of the transportation fleet is a momentous thing. It's going to have repercussions through all manner of industries and the ways that we do things, and we wanted to be part of it, right? This is like one of the biggest things that's really happened in the late 20th century and now the 21st century. We definitely want to be part of it and play a role in it.
I think that's what another part I look at that is the whole electric movement. You got a lot of people that view electric cars, electric everything as a push for green, for people are just trying to clean up the environment per se, and they might get that wrong misconception. Is like you said earlier, you guys are doing this to build what you view as a better dirt bike, not a replacement in the sense that, we got to be greener. I mean, even to the point when we ride them right now at some of your intros, we use a gas generator to charge them when we need to. It's not an issue of that sense for you guys. You guys are really looking at the advantages of what an electric bike can offer to the riding experience.
I mean, first and foremost, Alta is a performance motorcycle company that builds electric bikes because we think it's the best way to build a performance electric motorcycle. Though we are sort of aware of the macroeconomic and macro climate things going on, and somewhat concerned about them. So we think it's it's good business to be building electric, because there's going to be more electrics and there's going to be more regulations put on internal combustion engines. It's going to be harder and harder to extract performance out of internal combustion engines as those regulations kind of turn the screws on that technology, and electric will have more and more advantages over time.
Now, during the development time, I know we hear from, speaking of Tesla, other large manufacturers with some kind of electric product, you hear how quickly the motor and the battery technology is going forward. Even in the short time span for you, the couple years you guys were developing, was there, like you said, you do these simulations, okay, we need this much, battery pack power, everything to make it work. Were you surprised still by the gains you were seeing in that industry as you were chasing the product and trying to develop it?
Yeah, there's a lot of the technology is moving pretty rapidly. Both our understanding of what specific applications need and the actual things like battery capacity and motor power or torque density are improving and increasing. We're trying hard to stay at the forefront of that. We have a whole R&D effort here that is constantly evaluating all new technologies that can roll into those products, and we are rolling them into products, right? The 2018 MXR, the 2019 EXR are examples of us rolling a brand new cell technology into our battery packs that allowed for the doubling of the sustained power of the bike, or the continuous power of the bike, and a much more consistent user experience through the entire state of charge, right? So, that tech came and made our bikes better, and we incorporated it. So, yes.
I guess from my point of view, it's when I think back at the 120 years or so, like, of an internal combustion engine, its existence, its development, and you think of a battery and just a motor as a part itself being around for a similar span of time, it's still so surprising to me to think that, like I said, with internal combustion engines, there's this certain bit of between, I guess, topping out of technology in a way, less gains, where even though the battery has been around for a similar amount of time, motor, there's still, like I say, you're making these massive gains with that technology. Do you think that's just how unlimited the possibilities are, or just because the focus is so much heavier on it?
It's absolutely related to the latter, which is, right now, huge investments going into research and development of battery technology and the commercialization of that, and that's driven by demand. Every major automobile company on the planet has announced electrification programs. Companies like Volvo are discontinuing internal combustion engine production. Companies or countries like the Netherlands are going to ban the sale of internal combustion engines as soon as 2025. So things are moving in that direction, and the markets are responding by investing in battery technology and EV drivetrain technology, and really Alta is an example of that, right? Alta is a company that's been supported by investors, and those investors are investing in this business being much bigger in the future because of these changes.
Now, turning the page a little bit there, because I know people have just listened to us go on about the death of combustion. They're probably, some people are having their minor freakouts a little bit.
Yeah,
Going on to how I view you guys as a company. Like I said, first, I pull in your headquarters yesterday, and out back, it's not a bunch of electric cars and a bunch of electric bikes, a ton of gas bikes. Listen, you guys, you want to go racing against them, you want to be alongside them. You guys, most guys that you see on the staff have one as well. It's not it's not the, like I said, with the car world where it's everything has to switch. You guys are trying to be alongside that, complement it, and give that a different experience.
That's right. We're not anti, right? I think of every single motorcyclist in this company, which it's somewhere around 90%. Nobody is only electric, right? It's like every one of those people, if they have an electric bike, an Alta, they also still have gas bikes. I still have a bunch of gas bikes, and I love them, right? They're wonderful, but electric is bringing something to the table that's pretty amazing, I spend all my time thinking about how to make electric bikes better, and not so much how to make my gas bikes better.
So as you guys actually went forward with bringing this as a plan, like I said, I think the first version I saw was back before you guys were even Alta, when it was with BRD, the first product you showed off, which was a very supermoto based bike. That bike to what became the first Alta I think just from a quick glance, people may not notice it, but seeing the one you guys showed us the other day, it's like you guys kind of went back to the drawing board, it looks like.
We're somewhat fanatical about doing things well. And that very first prototype that we showed to the world back in 2012 was conceptually all there, right? In concept, it's put together very similar to the bike that we eventually brought to market. And it actually didn't perform poorly. It was actually pretty good. But literally every single part had a lot of opportunity to be better. And so when it came time to think about commercializing that, the concepts that were in that first prototype, which was, very much a handmade, lots of, 3D printed parts and CNC machine parts. Not a production ready prototype by any means. We really went back to the drawing board and took everything that we learned within building that prototype and testing and running that prototype, and refined every single part, literally 2 or 3 more times before that came into production. And it was a daunting, humongous effort, right? That first prototype was literally built by 4 people in 6 months. The next prototype that we actually operated took us another 2 years, and the team, by the time we ran it, was in the 20s. That was just to get a running prototype. Bringing that into production required the team to then triple to bring that bike into production, to the very first production, and then to get up to the production numbers we have now, the team doubled again. And so, it's a it ends up being an army of people to do this at the quality and level that we're trying to do it. And going back to your first question is, yeah, we went back to the drawing board and made everything way better. Lost mass, increased power, increased range, bigger battery. Went back to the drawing board on battery technology, incorporated a completely new battery strategy focused on the small cylindrical cells known as 18650s. Actually, a very similar strategy to the one Tesla has taken, and that put us at the bleeding edge of battery pack design. That pack that we have in production now is arguably the most energy dense, at least in specific energy, the most range or per pound or kilogram of any pack in transportation, right? Cars, bikes, anything. So it's pretty high tech, big investment for us to get there.
Hey all, we're just taking a quick break here from the chat to kind of thank once again the people that made this happen. As we mentioned at the top of the show, the Inside Line podcast is presented by Thor. Thor is celebrating 50 years of racing heritage, the first, the forever, Thor Motocross. And also, from tubes and tires to MX jerseys, gear bags, hard parts, and huge selection of dirt bikes, Chaparral Motorsports has everything you need to keep you roosting the track or the trail. Check out chapmoto.com. I hope you're all enjoying learning a lot more about a dirt bike you may not think you'd ever see in your lifetime. We're going to jump right back into the conversation with Derek Dornstein.
For people that maybe don't know exactly how electric power responds, one of the biggest advantages is 100% torque instantaneously. So when I think of that, I think of either the tire's going to spin ridiculous or you're going to loop out in place. So, of course, the bike we ride now has these algorithms and these control units that make the bike rideable and manage it and make it usable for the end user. But what was it like the first time you guys put together or running it? Who got tasked with sitting on it and twisting the throttle the first time? And
that would be me. Things required a lot of refinement. The very first things we ran, were pretty scary. There were some incidents in the history of Alta that someday we'll talk about. But it was you don't know what you don't know, right? So it's a lot like you just described. Things were too abrupt. The controls were not refined. Loss of traction scenarios were really abrupt and kind of scary. And that just gave us a new opportunity, right? Like to date, as far as we know, most anyone else who'd worked on development of electric vehicles were working on road going stuff, and so our application was for an off-road race bike, and tire spin is nearly not there's no scenario where it's not present, right? It's your tire is almost always spinning when you're on an off-road scenario. We got those first prototypes going, and we immediately were challenged by the need to refine algorithms and make the bike intuitive, make the power accessible, make wheel spin predictable, really make the bike behave, not so much like your gas bike, but in a way that riders could be in tune with and was intuitive and sort of made sense and was predictable and made them go fast. We spent a lot of time at racetracks doing testing, looking at data, getting rider feedback, making changes, and doing it again. And that effort, that iterative work, resulted in something that we're extremely proud of. We think that the way that the bike delivers power, be it the motocross bike or the off-road bike, the XR, is really in a class by itself. It's really something different and very, very special.
See, to me personally, the way the bike produces power, to me, honestly, of everything you guys have developed, is the most impressive part, because I look at battery pack, okay, there's smart people that can make a battery pack happen. There's engineers that can make a good chassis. Power and feel is such an interesting amount of effort that would have to be put into it, because I go back to it, people are always bringing up traction control systems, and they're always like, oh, these teams have this and the bikes are, it's like, okay, I've had the weird opportunity to try a wheelbase sensor unit on a dirt bike. It doesn't, I don't think people understand how key, yes, wheel spin, you want traction, but at the same time, a dirt bike, how key wheel spin is to making it maneuver how we're used to. The tires are almost never traveling the same speed, but so you guys couldn't just go the easy route of like the wheel spin, like, oh, you can just use basic traction control systems that are seen more on road going units. That would be overkill. It would make the bike it would be rideable, but it would be so different than anything we're used to. You wouldn't have that experience. So you guys were trying to find a medium level on dirt through a controller unit that was, I want to say, pretty unique and not really had done before.
There's constant internal debate on how much intervention the machine should have in what's going on, and we keep coming back to intuitiveness and empowering the rider to feel like they have the best tool to get around the obstacle, the course, the hill, the whatever it is that they're doing. And we do incorporate some traction control algorithms. It's an open loop traction control, so we don't use a front wheel speed sensor. It's really based on the responsiveness of the rear wheel and how quickly it will accelerate from various speeds and throttle openings, and it's a lot of iterative work. It's a lot of theory. What do we actually think happens, and we kind of model out the theories, and then we go out and test and see if it's working the way we think it does. It doesn't always work the way we think it does, I would say that we probably know as much or more about that, especially for two-wheelers, than anybody in the world right now.
That's what I think too, is the wheel speed thing. It comes down to one of the things that I'm sure from a data standpoint, somebody can go back and read back the any of the sensor feedback, just looking at a chart of wheel spin, everything, and try to develop something that on paper you think that's good. You could hand it to the test rider, they'd probably ride one lap and they could come back and it could either be good or they could be like, this is much worse than what I rode before. So there's that balance of somebody that's smart enough to look at all the data and being able to build it into something they think is better, but also understand what a rider's looking for and taking that feedback and kind of mixing that.
Yeah, I mean, here, it starts with really us being focused on this problem is really important, right? And for us, making a bike that works really well it's what we all show up to work to do, right? And so we have the resources and the priority to do that, and the theory is really an aid to do it better and faster. The empirical data, the feedback from the track, be a lap time or the rider subjective response is what it's all about. That's the key part, right? And so spending time at the track and testing is the foundation of that work.
Now, if anyone I've been curious about, I always think of when somebody goes, this kind of a project, is there any point that stands out to you either in the early development before you had a running prototype or during the running prototype where you hit either a snag or something where you guys are like, is this ever going to work? Is there anything stand out to you that's just like, why are we standing here doing this?
I mean, there's certainly in the the arc of Alta's emergence and to its current state, there's been really formidable challenges, right? And they're mostly around manufacturing. They're around finances, fundraising, right? Having enough money to do what we want to do. They're around hiring, getting the right people in the building at any one time. The technical challenges around designing the bike, building the bike, deploying the bike. We've had them. We have them. We face them continuously, and we push ourselves to try to be at the cutting edge always. But we've managed to break those down and overcome them, and it's because we've done really well at bringing together a really top-notch team. We have some really talented people here that come from a whole range of backgrounds. A lot of people with EV experience. I think the last time I heard we're about 25% ex-Tesla employees at Alta. So, Tesla has been the EV university for a lot of Alta employees, and but we've pulled people in from motorcycle business. Some of the big European companies are represented by employees here, or they were former employees of the big European motorcycle companies, and then also a bunch of automotive people, right? So this talent is what allows us to get through these problems.
So the fundraising thing always makes me work, because I've read either books or stories about certain people in their startup stage where they've been at stages where the product is so good, the people behind it are so passionate. There's so many things that should make it successful, but purely the financing of fundraising can be a problem. Did you guys ever hit a snag where you were saying we might have to close this down, or were you guys pretty lucky in that sense that it was always flowing pretty decent for you? Or
no, we've hit that point several times, and it's it's hard, right? We're doing really ambitious things that have a lot of risk associated with them. We're doing them pretty successfully right now, so that sure helps a lot. But there's been times where we had to promise things that we hadn't proven yet, right? We had to show pictures of designs and test results on a really small scale, and bring investors into that dream and vision, and have them look out ahead and believe that we could get there to the next stage. We've been really fortunate to have groups of investors that have stuck with us and made those investments at those critical moments along the way, it's paying off.
now, you yourself getting to ride the bike, is there a certain, was it the first time you rode? Was there a certain point in development the first time you remember riding the bike and being like, man, we are really on the right track? There's something that you had kind of like, I think you guys always try to say when we ride, you had that joy, that experience. It's different, but the same. Like there's the same, but the difference. Like, did you have a certain moment that stands out like that, or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The funny thing is, in that 2.5, 3 year period, in that 2.5, 3 year period, when we were developing the bike and talking about what it was going to be like, right? We had a lot of ideas about what we thought it would be like. When it finally came time that we had a working prototype that we had out in the dirt, on a motocross track, it was this realization that many of those things were spot on, right? That like that connectedness of the throttle, the response of the throttle, was possible, and even in the rough stage of the early prototypes, you could see it. You could see that this is something new and different, and the lack of shifting and clutching would give you the ability to focus on your line more, and your speed, and your approach to a jump, and carrying speed through a corner, and passing, and all that stuff. It was like getting more brain power, because you didn't have to put brain power on these other things, and those things were apparent right from the beginning, and I guess we had just obsessed on it enough to predict some of those things that came true.
So as you guys got deeper into it, you get closer to the production stage, getting your your suppliers, your components. One of the things that's interesting, of course, because the bike is so different, your frame, the whole engine pack design, there's so much that had to be unique about your bike that 100% there's nothing on the market that was close to what you required. But then you get down to some of the finishing bits, your triple clamps, your suspension components, wheels, foot pegs, things like that. I look at some of the other manufacturers out there, and at times it surprises me, even amongst their own model range, how little they make a certain part for a certain bike, and it's like everybody has to have their own hubs, everybody has to have their own sprocket offset, their own dang rotor offset, all this stuff. Now, I won't try to answer this because I'm not going to exactly know parts, but I look at like, you know, the WP supplier deal, Brembo, certain things that are I look at a lot of KTM parts that come to it. How much that did you guys look at and like, oh, did you guys early on realize, no, we should simplify this and use what's proven and it's available that we can, or how much of it, like, so was that cross up between tried to maybe develop some of your own stuff and decide to go back? Or
I mean, it's purely prioritization, right? So you know, we knew we wanted to build a premium bike, right? A bike with you know, that you know, probably would be at the high end of anything out there, if not more expensive, just because of the cost of EV drivetrain technology, especially EV battery, and that, you know, an expensive bike needs to have the best components. So we went out and sought the best components. Ended up in Europe for that stuff. You know, really happy with the relationship with both WP and Brembo. They're making great stuff. And to your point, did we feel like we needed to redesign those things? You know, undoubtedly there's opportunity in every nut and bolt on a motorcycle to refine it better, right? On our motorcycle, on our competitors' motorcycles. But we tried to focus on the biggest opportunities or the most important opportunities. And for us initially, it's all EV drivetrain, right? That's the critical stuff. You know, we did a really careful analysis of competitor chassis so that we could understand the performance of a chassis and what the state of the art was for chassis handling. You know, they're you know, designing better foot pegs and wheels and optimizing the wheel spacing and stuff wasn't nearly as important as making our motor make more horsepower or our battery go further. And so, you know, that's what we focused on, and we used you know, the guidance or in some cases the exact numbers from some of our competitors.
now I look at the bikes themselves as with an internal combustion engine bike, how many parts, especially take a 4-stroke, how many parts are in the engine moving? So how many suppliers have to be involved? How much those parts are going to cost to make? And no matter the numbers, there's just a lot of things that need to be ordered to produce that bike. Not to say that you open a battery pack and it's simple inside, but when I think of your guys' design and the components in it, I feel like there's, you know, in a sense, there's less going on in a sense of how many parts are needed to make it operational. So as we roll further into the future, as battery pack technology, as, you know, your high-end models have always the leading edge, but as some stuff backs down, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think the bikes will end up coming down a decent amount of price because of the simplicity and the not having to have so many suppliers for so many little individual components? Or
That's certainly possible. For sure, the bikes will continue to be more and more cost competitive with their gas-powered brethren. You know, we're going to constantly push to you know, increase power, increase range, you know, add battery capacity, and so there's kind of a push and pull between, you know, those things, right? You add more battery, you're not making the battery cost less, you're making it cost more. But you know, as the world electrifies and this technology becomes more common, you know, these costs likely do go down, and you can imagine a future state where you know, the bikes potentially are less. Certainly now we have a pretty strong case that the total cost of ownership of the bike that we build now is less than a gas bike, because you don't have to rebuild the motor after 50, 7,500 hours. You don't have to clean air, change engine oil, you know, change clutch plates, any of that kind of stuff. You know, the bike literally is a sealed system from the factory. You don't have to touch the engine oil in its lifetime. It's a 1,000-hour design life. You don't have to touch any of the battery. You just got to focus on things like chains and tires, and, you know, eventually, depending on how heavy-handed you are with pressure washer, maybe things like wheel bearings things like that. But it's the drive system is sealed and zero maintenance.
Now, the reason this comment comes up is, I guess the easiest way to point it out, it pops into my mind because of we were touring through here, and I didn't know what to expect. We get off the bus here, and I was trying to decide, okay, am I going to show up and there's going to be a small room with some designers and a couple dudes answering phones, and there's nothing else here? Is this an office? But show up, and the first thing I see around back is a bunch of shipping containers and trucks, and I'm thinking, okay, stuff is being built around here. You walk in, I think you guys have just right now as the day we're recording this, just under 100 employees or so. Of course, there's all these front offices. You got people doing design work, answering phone calls, marketing, range of people. You go out back and there's actually an assembly line, and we wandered through and I took a photo of a frame and a box behind it, and behind it, somewhere on a box, not even related frame, just one of the boxes in the background says made in China. So somebody decides to be an absolute smart aleck on social media, because that's what, it's Instagram. Never ceases to amaze me what people can come up with. But of course, they make that call out. Oh, made in China. I think we talked about this. I think around 45% or so of the components on the bike are made here in the USA. You have European suppliers, maybe part two for China, but that's still a lot of, the bike is being assembled here. There's a lot of parts purchased here, and no matter how anybody shakes it, it doesn't matter what bike you're buying, there's going to be one or two. I mean, you have to deal with suppliers all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world where the economy is global, the expertise around manufacturing things is global. It'd be awesome if we could buy every component for the bike, within 10 miles of here, and it was all at the price we needed and the quality we needed. That'd just make everything a lot simpler. But the truth is, that's not how things work anymore. And we're pretty proud that we have 45% of the BOM coming from the U.S. We have the next big chunk comes from Europe, with our suppliers like WP and Brembo and Cherbys. And then we've got a big chunk coming from Japan. We've got a chunk coming from Taiwan. I can't actually think of any parts that we're buying from China, to be honest.
Might have just been the cardboard box.
Yeah, but I bet there are a few, right? Yeah. Just because of the nature of how things work these days. I mean, our focus is really on where's the best supplier can deliver, at the quality we need, and is the best in their field, right? And so that's taken us, in some cases away from the U.S., into Europe and Japan and Taiwan.
Now, I mentioned that product line, your guys' desk, you're kind of on this little second floor, I think I want to call it mezzanine, where right above where we're sitting and talking right now. And from where you guys sit, you can actually look out on it. I mean, to say the word either proud, or is it just nice to look out there and know it's being made below you and on some factory out somewhere, and you get to kind of watch the creation every day, get to go around from start to finish?
Well, certainly there's some pride in what goes on under this roof and what has been built from nothing. But we're doing the manufacturing here because we want to touch that final product and make sure that it all goes together perfectly well. And I can't imagine not doing that. Right? It's so important for us to have our hands and our mark on what we build. And in addition to putting bikes together, we build all the EV drivetrain stuff, right? So we build battery packs, we build inverters, we build all the electronics, and this stuff is not only critical to the advantage that Alta has in EVs. It's the most sensitive, difficult to make, complicated components on the motorcycle, and us. Controlling the quality and the manufacturing processes and building that stuff, here is fundamental to our belief in how to deliver a top notch motorcycle to the market.
So our first day hanging out with you guys, we ended up taking a ride down through the town of San Francisco, down through downtown, and we ended up at this really cool co-op garage that one of the co-founders actually runs. And when we were there, we ended up running into two of the Harley-Davidson employees that are in town. They're working with you guys, Harley made an investment into the company, and as part of it, they've actually asked you guys to make 2 motorcycles for them, which I think is pretty interesting. No matter what anybody's opinion and view of Harley is currently, they are a company that have been around for a long time producing motorcycles, and instead of going this route themselves, they've clearly said, this is the better option for us, is to work with you guys. Are you surprised at all about that association that ended up happening in that entire deal?
Yeah, we are a little surprised. Harley is sort of makes very different products than the kind of products that we make, but they do see electrification of some percentage of the motorcycle business is something that's happening, and it's happening on a relatively soon timescale. And when they looked around, they found our motorcycle, and they actually bought one, and they tested it, and they were really impressed. They got a hold of us, and that led to them making a small investment, or maybe not a small, an investment in Alta, without any control of the company, but just as a fellow shareholder in Alta. And then that further led to an agreement for us to co-develop 2 products together, products that Alta would bring to market as well as Harley. We're in that process. It's a great way for Alta to share in the huge development expenses it takes to develop new products with somebody. And so far the relationship is going really, really well. They're really great people to work with. They're really forward thinking. They're really capable. They know a whole lot about developing motorcycles, and they're probably learning a few things about EV drivetrains from us, and we're certainly learning a few things about street motorcycles from them.
So going back to where this all started, the first thing, of course, we spoke about was the reason you developed the bike, the whole supermoto thing, when you had your race bike and you weren't happy with it. Now, with everything all said to where we are today, riding the supermoto model, is it everything you envisioned? Are you to where you wanted? Not to say that you guys aren't going to continue developing, but did you meet your own goal yet?
We've exceeded it. The bike works really well. I haven't actually gone out and done a supermoto race on one of our bikes. It's certainly on the list of things to do in the future. But I have no doubt that I would be actually faster on this bike than I would have been on my previous KTM. So mission accomplished.
Awesome. Well, you got a busy schedule. I know I've already delayed 1 year meeting, so I'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time, and pretty much giving us your time of day as busy as everything seems to be around here.
Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and love the work that you're doing. Vital is a crucial component of the motorcycle culture, and really appreciate it. So thank you.
We got a ton of dudes on the forum that love the bike. I literally see race reports like every weekend from dudes riding them. So you're definitely making an impact.
Yeah, I read them, and I love it. Right? It's like that feedback and that enthusiasm is awesome and contagious.